Hey guys, this is AI Gaming 1776, and this video is basically me using my quote unquote weakest GTX 960 playing Grand Theft Auto on a 144 Hz monitor. It is Grand Theft Auto 5, but out of the 4 GTX 960s, this is the one that runs with the lowest clock speed. And that reason is because this is a Mini ITX GTX 960 from EVGA. So as you can see, it looks pretty good. I know I'm using a camcorder, but it looks good in the viewfinder. It looks good on the screen. It is going to be a little bit weaker than my other GTX 960s though, because again, this is a Mini ITX card. Now you can see in the upper right hand corner, and I don't know how legible it is, again, because we're using a camcorder, but it is, hold on, let me try to make it as legible as I can right now. All right, so we're at, right here, that's the temperature, 73 degrees. The operating speed is 1380. The frame rate, I also have fraps going, that's 89. The VRAM being used is 2.345 gigabytes, so almost 2.5 gigabytes of VRAM. And we're getting 89 frames per second as we stare at the floor. We're using 7 gigabytes of system memory, but we will see fluctuations with that frame rate. Alright, so let me show you the settings. It's almost maxed out with the regular graphics, not the advanced ones, but the regular ones. 1920 by 1080, refresh rate is 144. We are using a DisplayPort cable with a BenQ XL2430T, 2430T. MSA, no AA is on, so that's all off. All AA is off. VSync is on. Population density, here, when I did the other GTX 960s, I had it one notch away from those three being maxed. So population density, variety, and then the distance scaling, those are all one notch away from being maxed. Texture quality maxed, shader quality maxed, shadow quality maxed. Reflection quality is at very high, so that's not maxed because it could go up to ultra. Reflection MSA is AA is only ×2. Water quality is high. Grass quality is high. The reason being is you can have grass quality at a higher setting in the city and you're fine, but as soon as you go into the woods, it starts like hammering your frame rate. So I just leave it at high because I think that's one of the settings where you actually have to restart the game if you change it, so I just leave it at high. Particles quality is very high. Soft shadows are on softer. Post effects are on very high. They could go up to ultra though. I'm going to leave them on very high for now. In-game depth of field effects are on. Anisotropic filtering is maxed. Ambient occlusion is maxed. Tessellation is maxed, okay? So I've already played around with this a little bit. It does get a lower frame rate than my other GTX 960s, but again, this is a Mini ITX card. See, it just stuttered at 63 frames per second. It just went to 63 and it stuttered a little bit. The other 960s hold on pretty strongly. Now, I've told you guys a lot of times in my videos that I am doing a review of the GTX 960. By the way, this is a 4 gigabyte Mini ITX. All right, 4 gigabyte Mini ITX GTX 960 from EVGA. So it's 4 gigabytes of VRAM, not 2. And I'm testing 4 different cards. So this one's Mini ITX. I'm testing a 4 gigabyte for the win from EVGA, a 2 gigabyte for the win from EVGA, and a 2 gigabyte PNY. I think it's an XLR8. Now, all of these GTX 960s do pretty well. And even right here, I mean, we're in the 70s right now outside. And this actually looks about on par to what I would normally get frame rate wise. But in that house, I normally get super high frame rate in the house. I'm talking like 90, 100 frames per second in the house. And it was 60 and hitching in there. So I'm not sure why it was doing that. Anyway, this video is supplemental overall to a review that I'm doing, but in case you were looking for a Mini ITX GTX 960, there's not many of them on the market. This is how it plays Grand Theft Auto 5, and I'll try to make more videos for it. Now, I'm using a camcorder because I'm using a high refresh rate monitor, and I want to be able to comment as I play this, is it, you know, living up to my standards on a high refresh rate monitor. And I couldn't do that if I used my Elgato and HDMI and all that So unfortunately, I am using a camcorder. It is off screen. I do apologize for that. But I'm looking in the viewfinder. It doesn't look like it's too terrible. So let's go get in the car, drive around a little bit. Again, it's daylight. Daylight is when the graphics are hit the hardest, and this actually looks really good. It just stuttered again when I moved the camera. The problem is it is stuttering a little bit here and there. Okay, we're using more than 2.5 gigabytes of VRAM now. We're using 2.598, so almost 2.6. It's hovering. It's hovering. It's about to hit 2.6. Notice the brickwork pops in the driveway. That's a real big thing for me. That kind of stuff. If you guys have seen my videos before, that's pretty important to me. The tread on the tires is, look at that. The tread on the tires is really nice. You can see the carbon fiber. See, here's the thing. Let me, while I'm driving, and whoa, people, and hopefully you can see the frame rate. Hopefully you can see all of those monitoring numbers in the corner. I can't really tell in the viewfinder, to be honest with you. Sometimes on the camcorder they show up fine and sometimes they don't. It looks like the frame rate counter is showing up just fine though. The yellow one in the most upper right of the corner. Alright, so let me tell you some of my experiences using the GTX 960 with a high refresh rate monitor. Because, you know, there's a lot to unpack here, okay? A lot of people, and I don't blame them, a lot of people feel like they need like super awesome strong graphics cards. And I was one of them, I don't know, all the way up until a couple months ago. Here, let me try to get to the point as I drive a car and try to bring up this probably seemingly random topic to you, but I feel like it pertains to a bigger ideal that I'm looking at. All right, I've been reviewing this high refresh rate monitor for about a month, and I've been reviewing GTX 960s for more than a month, 4 different ones. And I've really been kind of having some of my ideas turned on their head, if you will. You see, I started out with a 60 hertz monitor and a GTX 970. And the GTX 970 can max out regular graphics settings in just about any game there is, and then it can run, that's with no anti-aliasing at all. But then it can normally run MSAA times 2 or MSAA times 4 on top of the graphics being maxed out in most games. And when I was playing on my 60 hertz monitor, which I know a lot of people probably do play with 60 hertz monitors, I'm stuck in here. Oh, there we go, now I'm out. So as I was playing on my 60 hertz monitor, even my stronger card than this, again, this is an ITX, this is a Mini ITX GTX 960. So even when I played on my stronger graphics card, the GTX 970, and it was overclocked, with my 60 hertz monitor, I found myself feeling like, man, I need a stronger card even at 1080p. And the question becomes, why is that? Well, to be honest with you, using a cheaper, if you will, 60 hertz 1080p monitor, which most 60 hertz 1080p monitors are going to be cheaper than a 1440 monitor or a high refresh rate monitor at any resolution or a 4K monitor. So comparatively speaking, using a cheaper 1080p 60 hertz monitor, I felt like to really make my games look good, I had to use MSAA. And as a result, I found myself feeling like I needed a stronger graphics card than even a GTX 960 if I truly wanted to max out all the games that there are. You see what I'm saying? And I think a lot of other people feel that way based on some comments that I've read. Well, what I've learned since using a 144 hertz monitor, and this is not a G-Sync monitor, the XL2430T, this is not a G-Sync monitor. So it doesn't have variable refresh rate and all that jazz like G-Sync would. Since you, look at that, that's really, really beautiful, that reflection. Even in the viewfinder, I could tell that looked good just now. So what I've learned is on this monitor with MSAA completely off and driving around at 78 frames per second like we are, even when it dips into the 50s, it looks just fine. It looks really, really good and it feels really good. Now, part of the reason why so let's talk about some things. A lot of people think they need a super strong graphics card if they want to have a great gaming experience. I'm not talking about the guys that are happy to game at 30 frames per second, because those guys exist too. The PC gaming crowd is a very diverse bunch, okay? Some guys are super happy to play at a lower resolution at 30 frames per second. I'm not talking about those guys. The guys that think that if you want a really good experience, like the 60 frames per second or better experience, a lot of guys probably think they need a stronger graphics card. And like I said, I was using a 970. I was playing on a good monitor. It's the BenQ RL2455HM. It's a good monitor. Go look at the reviews on Amazon. And I've had great experiences with it. But to make games truly pop and truly look good, I had to have them pretty much maxed, and I had to have MSAA on. Well, what's interesting is now that I have the higher refresh rate monitor, I've learned that turning some settings down, look at that. I just got in a crash. I just rotated the camera and it barely hitched just a little bit. Finally, as I was rotating that camera, it hitched a little bit. So what I've learned is if you get a higher refresh rate monitor, even if you have a so-called weaker graphics card like the GTX 960, you can have an almost more enjoyable experience than you can with the 9. Because look, with a 970, I could use these exact same settings right now plus MSAA times 2 and get the same frame rate. Okay? The thing is this GTX 960 on a higher refresh rate monitor is very pleasant. It is very pleasing to the eye. It is very smooth playing. And you saw the settings. I'll show you again. The settings are not really low. I have, I made a couple sacrifices. There's no AA on. Population density, population variety, and distance scaling, they're not maxed, but they're one notch away each. And then these are all maxed. What I really don't have maxed is I don't have water max. I don't have particles. Well, I do have particles maxed. I don't have water maxed. I don't have grass maxed. Let's see if I can turn up the post effects without having to restart the game. Let's see how that affects the frame rate. Let's see if it affects the frame rate and or if it makes the game look better. So we'll drive around with that on. But I mean, these are not crappy settings, all right? And it's getting at least in the 60 frames per second neighborhood. Even when it was in the house, it did go into the 50s. But it's getting in the 60 frame per second neighborhood. Oh, and going back to what I said when I first started the video, this is my weakest GTX 960. This is my GTX 960 that has the lowest clock speed. This is my GTX 960 that gets the lowest frame rates out of all four of them. Okay, even my PNY card normally has, I was going to say it normally has a higher clock speed, but I just realized it matches this at 1380. For some reason, I thought this was a lower clock speed. So, okay, so here's an interesting one. I had the PNY video posted. Like now I feel like I need to go back and watch that again, because I still feel like the PNY might have been doing better frame rate wise than this. I'm not sure. Not sure at all. But still, not a bad experience on any of the GTX 960s. Not a bad experience is the point that I'm getting at. And I'm not using MSAA at all. Whereas on my 60 Hertz monitor, because you don't have the extra refresh rate, and I'm going to tell you right now, this monitor is crisper. So even with HDMI and even at 60 frames per second, this monitor right here has a way more crisp image, even if you do apples to apples. Okay, same graphics card, same settings. Only thing different is different monitors, right? Different monitors, but both using the same HDMI cable. Both at 60 frames per second locked refresh rate, because this monitor won't go higher with HDMI for me. I'm using Windows 7. I don't know if this is what it's like for everybody, but for me in this monitor, I seem to have to use DisplayPort in order to get the 144 or even 120, anything that's really above 60. So anyway, this monitor, even with an HDMI cable, even with the same graphics card, even the same settings, it's still sharper because it's just a higher quality monitor. There's higher quality parts in it, I'm sure. So It looks good without MSAA. And in particular with the DisplayPort cable, and with the fact, now we're going 70 frames per second a lot of the time out here, or even like it went down to 66. Might not sound like a lot, but that's 10%. And I know people base their purchases on graphics cards on stuff as low as 10%. It happens all the time. If you look at the benchmarks, and if you look at, oh, I went with this this graphics card. Let's say you're looking at two 960s or two 970s or two 980s or two 980 Ti's from different companies, and you watched Paul's Hardware or Hardware Canucks or whatever, and you looked at their little chart, their little bar graph, you probably picked the one that was only 10% higher, frame rate wise. So 66 is not anything to sneeze at. That's still a 10% performance boost over 60. But look, we're at 70, we were at 72 just now. So that would be a 20% boost. And sometimes, like inside buildings, this can go as high as 100. It did in the house when I was in the bedroom earlier. This Mini ITX card right here. So I'm not saying you don't need strong graphics cards. I want strong graphics cards. My ultimate goal is to have pretty much all of the graphics cards out there so I can do benchmarking and tests and everything. And I can continue to test new games as they come out. All right. I have a YouTube channel and I like to do this. This is fun for me. I like to test the different games. However, if I was just some guy playing video games and I didn't have a channel and I didn't have any reason to do benchmarking and tests and everything, a GTX 960 plus this monitor is a really good experience. And I know it may sound like a waste. It may sound like a true waste. Like, why would you buy this is twice as expensive as a 60 hertz counterpart. So it's like, why would you buy a monitor that's twice as expensive to only get an extra 6 to 12 frames per second outside? And okay, fine, it's 100 frames per second inside, but a lot of you may feel like that sounds like a waste, and I get that. And I'm not even necessarily recommending that, hey, you go get an XL2430T and a GTX 960, and that's going to be like your dream setup. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is I think a lot of people might be highly unaware of the fact that just going to a nice quality, high refresh rate 1080p monitor, you can have great results even with a GTX 960. This GTX 960 plus this 144 hertz monitor kind of looks better than my 970 on my 60 hertz monitor, because the 970 is capped at that 60 frames per second. And what I've noticed is you get more stuttering playing the same game on the same settings with the same graphics card. I've noticed that I get more stuttering on my 60 hertz monitor than I do my 144 hertz monitor. And I think that's because you're bouncing off of your frame rate cap at 60 hertz. I think you keep bouncing off of that. And people hate VSync and everything. It's, oh, there's input lag and there's this, that, and the other. I really think that if you have a 60 hertz monitor, VSync is a worse experience. Like, I think, okay, I've had more screen tearing on the 60 hertz monitor. I've had more input lag on the 60 hertz monitor. And I think it goes back to the fact that modern graphics cards, even a 750 Ti, heck, even a GTX 745 can hit 60 frames per second in 1080p in a lot of games. So even some of the weakest graphics cards on the market can hit 60 hertz in 1080p. Maybe the settings have to be down, but they can do it. So I think what happens is 60 hertz is like the bottleneck, if you will. If you have a 60 hertz monitor, I feel like with modern graphics cards, it's almost like a bottleneck for you. You see what I mean? I noticed that with my GTX 745, it came with my computer. I'm using a pre-built computer. It's not a bad one. I've got 16 gigabytes of system RAM. I've got a 4790 i7 processor. So it's not crap. This isn't garbage. I've noticed that when I use the GTX 745 in the 60 hertz monitor, I don't get as much screen tearing and input lag and everything as when I use my stronger graphics cards in the 60 hertz monitor. So then it goes back to the fact that I really think modern graphics cards are too strong for 60 hertz monitors. I almost think like 60 hertz 1080p monitors, like their time is done, right? Unless like you're just trying to save money and have a cheap monitor, which I get it, right? Like this is basically an extra $200 for this monitor over a 60 hertz counterpart. And for a lot of you, you know, the GTX 960 is $200. So the cost of this monitor, you could have a 60 hertz monitor plus a graphics card. Or you could go from an i5 to an i7. Okay, you know what $200 is? $200 is enough to get the 4790 instead of the 4690. Or is it the 4760? Whatever. It's enough money to get the i7 instead of the i5 and then get an all-in-one water cooler loop for your CPU. So $200 is not an inconsequential amount of money. I'm aware of that. However, and again, it's not necessarily that I'm here to tell you that you need to go buy a 144 hertz monitor or you need to go buy a GTX 960 or any of that. I guess what it is, I'm trying to share this with you because I don't really see what I'm saying to you right now in this video. I don't really see people saying that on the internet too much. I don't really see the videos saying it. I don't really see it being said in the forums. And maybe it has been said by other people, but it hasn't reached that critical mass where so many people are saying it that I've run into people saying it. You know what I mean? And I read a lot of forums. I watch a ton of YouTube videos. So more than anything, I'm just trying to share something with you guys that I've learned. That I am playing Grand Theft Auto 5 with a Mini ITX GTX 960. And it's a good experience. You know, it is a very good experience. This does not suck. And yeah, I'm playing on a 144 hertz monitor and I'm only getting 72 frames per second as I stand here. I got 69 when I got out of the car. But this looks really good. What happens if I zoom in? This looks really... There we go. Climb up there. Let you see the guy. I promise you guys, this looks really good. It's a very strong picture. It's good contrast. It's good pop. It's good smoothness. I honestly, sorry I'm shaking the camera. I honestly have no complaints. So this video serves two purposes. One, it is my Mini ITX GTX 960 test for Grand Theft Auto 5. But at the same time, it's letting you guys know that, you know, maybe your 60 hertz monitor is holding you back. And oh, here's another thing. What if you already have a GTX 960 or you already have a GTX 970 or you already have an AMD equivalent, okay, like an R9 270 or R9 370 or whatever you have, an R9 280? Not really sure what the equivalents are on the AMD side. But let's say you already have one of those graphics cards. Maybe you just get this monitor instead, or get a similar high refresh rate monitor instead of having to upgrade your graphics card. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of pieces to think about. When I was using that 60 hertz monitor, I felt like I almost had to use MSAA to make a game look good. That's how I felt. Whereas this is a sharper monitor, so it already has a sharper image. So even at 60 frames per second with an HDMI cable, it's more enjoyable as far as like the crispness and all that goes. And then there's the fact that you can do the higher refresh rate. And guys, higher refresh rate is not a unicorn. Okay, like, and even Linus Tech Tips has said this, and even Jay's 2 Cents has said this, that they have noticed that the difference between 75 frames per second and 60 frames per second is actually a pretty noticeable difference. Now, I'll be honest with you. Is it as noticeable as the difference between 30 and 60? No. No, it's not. But then again, 30 and 60 is a 100% performance increase, whereas 60 to 75, that's a 25% performance increase. But still, it is noticeable. More than anything, it's just smoother on this monitor than it is with my 60 hertz monitor. I mean, that's what really, really does it for me. And it factors into the addictiveness. Like, I was surprised with myself when I was happy to play without MSAA. I was really, really surprised because I was so addicted to MSAA, and now I'm addicted to the higher frame rate. And it's reached a point where if I have to, I have a better experience turning some settings down. See, I used to max all the settings with the 970 and turn on MSAA, whereas now I feel like it looks better and feels better if I actually turn settings down and get that higher frame rate. So yeah, I know this has been a big mouthful, guys, and sometimes I talk too much, I get that. But hopefully, and what I'm saying isn't the gospel either. You know, I'm not telling you to run out today and go get a high refresh rate monitor. I'm not telling you that. I'm honestly, more than anything, I'm trying to share with you some experience that I've had with this, and maybe it'll help you. And maybe as more and more people share their experiences, there'll be some new common knowledge out there. Because the common knowledge that's out there right now, I feel like it might be getting a little dated. You know what I mean? It might be time for some new common knowledge. So just sharing my experience and what's been going on. I think this feels so much more responsive. And honestly, it's not as shiny as MSAA. If I had MSAA on, even times 2, everything would have that like shiny layer to it, and that is attractive, don't get me wrong. But this is nice too. This is nice too. It's a different kind of nice. It's not as shiny of a nice, but it's a really crisp nice anyway. And that's one of the things that MSAA was doing before for me, was it was adding crispness to the experience. So anyway, I hope this video has been helpful for you guys. This has been I was gonna say GTX 960. This has been AI Game. What the heck? What did I do to make the cops come after me? Huh. Kind of curious. Anyway, this has been AI Gaming 1776, and hopefully you guys have yourselves an excellent day.